authority to sell grain. He has the authority to handle all matters pertaining to the famine and the supply that they have on hand. That man, as we know, was, of course, Joseph. And he recognizes his brothers, but the brothers don't recognize Joseph. So Joseph gave his brothers a test, and he called them spies, and he put them in prison. He then sent 9 of them home with a demand. And the demand is that you bring the youngest brother back here to Egypt. And that would be Benjamin. The brothers leave, and along the way they make a discovery that they had opened their sack, and they found that money was in the sack. And that was the money that was supposed to pay for the grain, but it had been put back in the sack. And they got back home. All of them had their money in their sack, and this caused great fear to be on the brothers and on Dad, Jacob. Now they tell Dad, listen, we need to go back with Benjamin, but Jacob refuses. Despite Reuben's efforts that we saw last week in the end of 42, he tried to convince Dad that we need to go back with Benjamin. Jacob said no. And so all of the brothers are back home, save Simeon, who is now alone in prison in Egypt. Now, I want to pause for a moment here, and I want to put up for you the list of the 12 brothers. And if you could put that up for me. The last 2 on the list we're certainly familiar with. The very end of the list, and this is in order as I understand it. So Joseph and Benjamin, of course, the study is on Joseph. He's almost at the end of the list there. We've talked a little bit about Benjamin, but he's going to become a more prominent role in this storyline as it unfolds here this week. So we're familiar with those 2 at the end. Then you also have at the beginning Reuben. Now we've said that name because Reuben was the one, if you recall, that said, no, let's not do this. He apparently walked away and then found out that Joseph had been sold. It appears that he wanted to somehow figure out how to get Joseph back to Dad, but was unable to do that. And then you have Simeon, that we've also used his name because he is the one that was left back in Egypt. And then you have the others in between there. You are probably familiar with those names. I don't think I've said a single one of those names in this study thus far, but then you have the others. But I was posed the question after the service last week, why Simeon? Why was Simeon the one that was left behind? And I didn't have an answer. So I did a little research, and the person that asked that question is here, so I'll give them the answer, and I'll give it to everybody else. But I came across this simple answer that I will suggest for today. Reuben was the firstborn. And as such, Joseph would have known that, and Joseph would not have taken him, understanding just how important the firstborn was in the culture and to his father. Additionally, Joseph probably understood a little bit of the tension between Reuben and the brothers. Not sure exactly how much he knew, but he probably had some understanding that Reuben wanted to stop all of this. Reuben, however, did participate in some level, so I think he too felt guilt in all of this. So the simple answer would be this that I will suggest. I'm not saying this is the answer, this is my thought for you, is that the next oldest who was culpable in all of this was the one that he took. Now, I don't know how Joseph made it appear to them. I don't know if he asked what the age breakdown was, or if he just knew, and he realized that Simeon was the oldest one that was part of the plan to make this happen. Reuben seemed to at least try to stop it. So the only reason I bring that up is that to answer that question, that Simeon seems like the likeliest choice as the oldest one that was culpable in all this, who is also not the firstborn. So there you have it. If you have a different idea, let me know, and I'll be happy to discuss it as well. But that's the thought for you. So Simeon is left behind in prison. Now, we aren't told about Simeon's stay. I do wonder if Joseph visited him or wanted to visit him. I would think that Joseph made sure that he was properly cared for. But I would also imagine that for Simeon, this had to be an awful stretch in his life. I mean, think about that. Here he is separated from his family. He's in prison. He doesn't know what's going to happen. I wonder if he questioned in his mind whether or not Dad would ever let Benjamin back, whether or not he would ever see those brothers again. I imagine it was a rough time period. So we come to chapter 43 now this morning, and let's begin with preparing to return to Egypt. Preparing to return to Egypt. So we left off saying that Jacob wasn't a fan of this. They are going to go back, as this point kind of gives away that idea. But let's begin with the beginning of this chapter here. Now, going back to Egypt was going to be a bit complicated. They won't actually arrive there in our study until verse 15. So everything from verse 1 up to verse 15, we could put it this way, is either negotiating with Dad or planning to make the journey happen. I don't know what happened in the home between Jacob and his sons, but I just imagine there was some really intense discussions. I don't imagine this was the smoothest time in the home. I imagine there were some tensions that made life really difficult. Dare I even say arguments, where they raised their voices at one another as they worked through all of this. Now, again, can't say for sure what happened there, but I would imagine this was a challenging time. Verse number 1 of 43, and the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass, when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said unto them, Go again, buy us a little food. Now, we're not told how long it has been. They have used the grain, so it's been some time. So at the end of whatever this time period is, Jacob then instructs his sons, the brothers, 9 of them apparently, go back to Egypt and buy corn. We do not read here what he said about Benjamin, but we assume, based off of what is going to follow here, that the instructions were, the 9 of you go back to Egypt. Verse 3. And Judah spake unto him, we have another name now, saying, The man did solemnly protest us, saying, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said unto us, Ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. I already mentioned that last chapter, Reuben tried to step in and make a deal. Unable to do so, another brother, Judah, steps up to the plate, and he begins to attempt to reason with his dad. We could even say negotiate with his dad. And he really makes an ultimatum here, right? If you will give us Benjamin, we'll go, but if not, we're not going to go. From the perspective of the 9, put yourself in their shoes for a moment. If they go back without Benjamin, the man in Egypt will conclude they are lying. And they truly are spies. They don't know what's happening here, but that's what they would think. If that happens, the brothers assume that they will all be imprisoned, at the least, but possibly even something more for being spies. They might even be killed. So Judah lays it right on the table for Dad. Well, listen, if you send Benjamin, we'll go. But if not, we're not going anywhere. Now, I would guess Jacob understood this, but I also think he was in great inner turmoil as all this was unfolding. Verse number 6, and Israel, that's Jacob as well, but in Israel said, Wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? And they said, The man asked us straightly of our state and of our kindred, saying, Is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? And we told him according to the tenor of these words, could we certainly know that he would say, Bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou and our little ones. I will be for surety for him, of my hand shalt thou require of him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. Jacob is frustrated with the situation. He is frustrated with his sons. And so he asked them, why did you even tell them about another brother? I mean, why would you even need to bring that up? To him, getting grain should have been a simple transaction. Give them the money, they give you the grain, and you get back here. You don't need to get into the personal details. Jacob doesn't understand why all this is happening. The brothers don't understand it all either. Joseph is aware of the situation, but what we have to see here is that God is at work in all of this. To answer their father, they explain, listen, this man asked specific questions. Joseph wanted to know about his father, and he wanted to know about his brother Benjamin. And so he asked questions without giving away who he was, but that he could get the information he wanted. And as the brothers point out, and really a fair rebuttal here, is how in the world would we know that the man would turn around and say, okay, you have to bring Benjamin here? So Judah works to close this deal, and he even made a pledge. I will bring Benjamin back. And so he is taking the responsibility here. The famine continues to grow worse. Their food is run out. Jacob has to make a decision here. Either I send Benjamin or we die for lack of food. It was a rough spot for him to be in. And apparently this, I suggested at the beginning that there were some rough moments and some intense discussions and negotiations because apparently this took a while. Judah states that they could have gone to Egypt and come back 2 times in all the time that they have been negotiating this through. That brings us to verses 11 through 14. And Pastor Matt led us in reading there, but Jacob, or Israel, finally consents to the plan. Now, he is afraid that something might happen to Benjamin, but he also realizes if they don't send Benjamin, they will likely die of starvation. So they plan to bring gifts or presents with the hopes that it will appease the man, Joseph. They take double their money with them. Money for the original purchase plus money for this current purchase. Jacob's prayer, Jacob's desire is that both Benjamin and Simeon come home. However, Jacob resigns himself to the fact that in addition to losing Joseph and Simeon, he may now lose Benjamin. He's resigned himself to this. Notice verse 15 again. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand, and Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. Everything up until now has been preparation. At the very end of that verse, we find out they go to Egypt. 9 brothers plus Benjamin, so once again 10 in total, with gifts, money, all go to Egypt. And upon arrival, they stand before Joseph. Now, again, we have to think in the context of that day. Joseph's brothers didn't text Egypt with their flight number and arrival time. They didn't give notice of what train they would arrive on. They just went. Joseph, on the other hand, perhaps spent many days or woke up many mornings wondering, would today be the day that they will return? Will today be the day that I will see Benjamin? I imagine Joseph thought of this daily. And it's been a good amount of time that he's been waiting. And then think about Benjamin for a moment. If I understand the timeline correctly, Benjamin was approximately 13 years younger than Joseph, give or take. If Joseph was sold at 17 years old, then Benjamin would have been around 4 years old. 4 years old, the last time that Joseph and Benjamin were together. 4 years old that Joseph would have last laid his eyes on his little brother. Now, Benjamin would be in his 20s, somewhere in his mid-20s, depending on the exact time frame, how all this has passed. We're going to say at least 20 years, maybe a little bit further on the time frame. We don't know exactly. But from a 4-year-old boy to a man in his middle 20s, things have changed a lot, haven't they? So let's notice next that Joseph sees Benjamin. A lot is about to unfold for Joseph. But for Joseph, laying eyes on his brother, the son of his mother Rachel, was going to be a momentous occasion. Verse 16 and 17 were read earlier as well, but Joseph sees the return of his brothers. And it appears here he quickly does a head count, and he sees the 9 that he sent back, plus he also notices one more with him, or with them. And it appears at this point Joseph makes a more general glance, perhaps from a distance. Remember, Joseph doesn't know that they're arriving today. So as they come here and they show up, he sends to have a meal made ready so he can eat with these brothers. The 10, including Benjamin, are brought to the home of Joseph. Now, I do wonder, what did the servants know? How much did the servants know? I wonder, did Joseph's wife know? How much had he told her? I would think he'd told something to somebody, but I can only imagine if his wife knew that your 10 brothers will be coming to eat, actually all 11 here, we'll see in a moment, was she looking out the window thinking, really, his brothers, they're here? Maybe she had seen them earlier. We don't know exactly, but I just wonder what they all knew. But for the brothers, let's look at their response in verse number 18 and following. And the men, that's the brothers, were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us, and take us for bondmen and our asses. And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass, when we came to the inn, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks. And then notice the response of the steward here. And he said, peace to you. Fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simeon out unto them. Joseph's brothers are scared out of their minds right now. The thing that was on their minds was that money that showed up in their sacks. They approached the house of Joseph, and the steward of Joseph is there. I assume through a translator they began to explain, listen, we brought money and you were supposed to take that money, but when we got to the inn, we opened up and we found the money was here, and we didn't intend to take that. You should have had that money. So we've brought back our money and we intend to give it to you, and we brought more money so that we can pay for it. You can sense the urgency, the uneasiness in their voice, right? The sense that they were assuming that this was maybe a mistake in Egypt, or this was something else funny going on, some type of test. I think it's interesting how the steward responds, though. He attributes the money as a result of their God and the God of their father, who would be Jacob. And this would lead me to believe two things. First of all, Joseph had perhaps told the servant there, the steward, what was going on, and maybe he even knew that it was his brothers. Why else would he refer to the father of these men? Perhaps Joseph even explained the test that he was now putting his brothers under so that he could find out where their loyalties truly lay. But more importantly, it appears that Joseph had told the steward of his house, this man, about the true and living God. Now, I'm not going to press more than is here, and we don't know exactly what this man believed or whether he was just saying what Joseph had said, but Joseph had at least explained to him something that he would say that. So the brothers are very nervous as this begins, but they get some relief that the money was returned and that was not a problem. And then they're probably even more relieved when Simeon reappears, right? There's Simeon. However, I imagine of the 11 brothers at this moment, no one is happier than Simeon, right? Can you imagine seeing those brothers after all this time in prison? Boy, was he glad. Verse 24 and 25. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender. And they made ready the present against Joseph came at noon, for they had heard that they should eat bread there. They go into Joseph's home. They are given water to drink. They wash their feet. They clean up because they're going to be in Joseph's presence. Their donkeys were given provisions, something to eat, taken care of. And in anticipation of the man that is going to arrive, the man, right? The brothers prepare the present that they had brought, hoping that this will gain favor with this man. Verse number 26 now. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed themselves to him to the earth. As soon as Joseph is there, they hand this present, hoping to appease him. But did you notice that other significant part of this verse? Does it remind you of that dream back in chapter number 37? Specifically, part of that dream, or those two dreams, it says that 11 stars bowed down to me. Boy, can you see that dream coming true now? I would imagine Joseph understood the significance of that dream at this moment. I imagine the 10 brothers didn't realize it at this point. I don't even know if Benjamin knew about the dream. I don't know what he was told. Remember, he would have just been a little one, if not even alive then, when all that happened. Had the 10 brothers even told Benjamin about this? Verse 27 and 28. And he asked of their welfare and said, Is your father well? The old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive? And they answered, Thy servant our father is in good health. He is yet alive. And they bowed down their heads and made obeisance. To the brothers, this is probably small talk, just formalities that he's just asking. But to Joseph, these questions are of incredible significance, and how relieved he must have been to receive a good report. Verse 29, and he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, Is this your younger brother of whom ye spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon his brother. And he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. At this time, Joseph is holding a lot of things together with all that's unfolding. He has the brothers to deal with. He's concerned about dad. He's running the whole situation in Egypt with the grain. But now, at this time, he asks a question, is this Benjamin? It has been a long time since he saw that little boy. I posed the question last week just briefly, but could they have just brought a servant and claimed that this is Benjamin? Could Joseph really remember what his little 4-year-old brother looked like that he hasn't seen in 20 plus years? But I imagine he could tell. He could see the resemblance to his parents and know, this is my brother. All this happening through an interpreter, and the 11 brothers are clueless to the significance of this moment. But Joseph is so overcome with emotion that he runs out of the room and he goes to a private place and he weeps, having seen his brother. I would imagine Joseph at that moment wanted nothing more than to grab his brother and to hug him and to weep with him. But knowing all else that was going on, he had to run out of the room and collect himself. Verse 31, speaking of Joseph now, he washed his face and went out and refrained himself and said, set on bread. And they set on for him by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is abomination unto the Egyptians. Joseph returns, and he gives the command to eat. Joseph would eat separately from his brothers, and due to what was there in that culture in that day, they couldn't eat all together, but they're all there in that room, not at the same table, but eating at the same time. Verse 33. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled at another. So let's put up that list again if we could. This was fascinating to the brothers because the men were sat down in order. Now, we could understand Benjamin being put at the end as the youngest, right? Because that was well established. They had a younger brother. He was the youngest. One is no more, but the youngest is no more, or is back at home with dad. So the youngest is here, Benjamin. So Benjamin is there at one end. That's fine. But how is it that they were placed in order? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and then you go all the way down. Save one, Joseph was not in that list, right? He was sitting separately, and then Benjamin at the end. The brothers look at each other in amazement. They are shocked by the fact that they were put in order. Now, I am guessing that Joseph himself didn't walk out and say, all right, Reuben, you come here, you sit here. Simeon, you come here, you sit here. Or Benjamin, you're down here. And I'm guessing he didn't personally do it. It just doesn't seem fitting with who he was and how all that would be. I am guessing it would have been the steward or one of his servants that did that. If so, it would give further reason to the fact that Joseph had explained the situation and that the steward was aware, and perhaps he had been even given him a list to tell him how to put him in that order. I don't know exactly how it all happened, but however it did, the brothers are in amazement that they were put in order like this. If it was 3 brothers and you knew the youngest, okay, you have a 50-50 chance, right? We could go with that. But when you have 11 of them and you only know one to put those other 10 in order, obviously, Joseph knew these men. And so they sit down to eat. and we'll finish with verse 34 here today. And he took and sent messes unto them from before him. Now, messes is a good old word to mean their meal, okay? Their food, all right? They got their meal. But then notice, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. So all of the men ate their mess, okay? Kids, don't go home and say, my meal looks like a mess today, okay? And say, that's what Pastor Nate said, right? It's right here in the Bible, all right? Don't say that to Mom, okay? She won't appreciate that. But did you notice that Benjamin got 5 times as much? That probably means Benjamin had a whole lot more food than he could even eat, right? Because I imagine they were all given enough food so that it would take care of all of them. Benjamin's plate was piled high 5 times more. And I think it was done so that Joseph could watch their faces. Remember, they're all in front of him. And so the food comes out, right? Here you go, Reuben. Here you go, all the way down. And then, right? Might have taken 2 servants to bring that one out. I don't know. But I imagine Joseph was watching the faces of his 10 brothers. How are they going to respond to all this? Now, Joseph had given them one test, and that was that they would bring back their brother to prove they weren't spies. That began last week. We finished that up this week. Next week, we're going to see another test. But as we conclude, I just want to remind you of the fact that Joseph remained faithful to his God through all of this. He is testing his brothers, which I am sure they do not appreciate one bit at this moment. However, he is preparing them so that they can have a confidence and a trust in God, which will be absolutely essential for what God is going to do with these brothers and with the nation of Israel in the future. But isn't it amazing to see that Joseph's first thought wasn't revenge? It wasn't, now I have my chance. Maybe that would be my thought and your thought, right? I'm going to get even. Boy, is that easy, right, for us to have that. Well, I'm going to get back at them. No, Joseph was faithful. Faithful to the Lord. He's testing them, but he loves them. He cares for them, and he's going to take care of them. So Joseph was faithful, but also understand in all of this that God is faithful. The brothers are alive because of what God has done, even despite their sin and their actions. The nation of Israel will remain and be taken care of because God, in his great love, takes care of his people and did so through this circumstance that we are looking at here. So we leave off this morning with all the brothers, all 12 of them eating for the first time in at least 20 years. I wonder if they ever had a family meal that included all 20 of them like this, all 12 of them like this, going back all these 20 years. If so, Benjamin would have just been a little boy at the table. And next week, we will unpack the story as the brothers leave to go back home, and Joseph gives them another test. Let's pray. Lord, may we understand that you do not make mistakes. Sometimes we don't understand why your plan unfolds the way it unfolds, but you are a God that never makes mistakes. Lord, we thank you for the example of Joseph to stay faithful despite the circumstance that has gone on for over 20 years. Lord, many of us get annoyed, fed up, ready for revenge in 20 minutes. Many of us respond wrongly after just something that's taken even less than that in time. God, may we remain faithful to you, trust you, even through the circumstances that we don't care for, we don't like, we don't understand. And thank you that you are faithful to the nation of Israel to preserve them. God, thank you for the wonderful story that we are unfolding here through Genesis. We look forward to continuing it next week. But may we understand this story as a whole and understand all that you are doing and see your sovereignty in it all.